Welcome to Multifamily Grit, where we bring in the experts to share their stories of the celebrations and struggles of one of the most important industries in the U.S., multifamily property management. I am joined today by Donald Davidoff, co-founder and CEO of REBA, the real estate business analytics tool, a company committed to transforming the multifamily industry through smarter business intelligence tools that enable data-driven decision-making. Donald is a true innovator and thought leader in the space, with a career that includes leading the team that created the lease rent options LRO pricing system at Archstone, the first of its kind in multifamily, and serving as SVP of strategic systems at Archstone and EVP of pricing and marketing at Holiday Retirement. Known for his deep understanding of the industry and his passion for solving hard problems, Donald brings a unique blend of technical knowledge and operational insight. In today's conversation, we unpack what it really takes to build a product that works with operators rather than for them, why REBA was intentionally built from a clean slate to address legacy system limitations, and how persistence became one of their most powerful differentiators. We'll also dig into Donald's 3-cell model of customer engagement, how he thinks about product design in terms of solving the right problems, and why so many in the industry give up too soon on truly transformative solutions. If you've ever wondered what separates a vendor from a true partner, or how to bring relentless persistence to innovation, this is an episode you won't want to miss. But before we get started, we're sponsored today by the only core property management operating system built with an emphasis for affordable owners and operators. Fortress revolutionizes affordable management with features focused on automating housing assistance charges and payments to keep ledgers clean and accurate, centralizing file reviews and document storage through Fortress leveraging AWS, and a free in-system smart waitlist to ensure your property stays in compliance. And don't forget, if you like what you hear today, please like, subscribe, and share with someone you think would enjoy this episode. So, Donald, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, you and I have attended many industry events together, and generally speaking, have a kindred spirit in bringing entertainment to the room or the panel or whatever it is that we're talking on, which I absolutely love. But before we dig in and start that fun conversation, would you mind sharing with our listeners how you got your start in the industry?
Yeah, sure. Like many in this industry, I refer to it as a flypaper industry. Most people come in by accident. Pardon me, whether they just needed to save some money on rent when they were in college and started leasing, or like me, I came in from outside the industry. So I was working for a pricing and revenue management software company called Talus Solutions at the time. I'd worked on rental car systems, on hotel gaming, like working with Harrah's Entertainment, how to bring the gaming value from the total rewards card into the revenue management equation, along with the hotel rate, and several other projects as well. And I was fortunate enough to lead the team that built LRO. And then in late 2001, I switched sides of the table and went to work for Archstone as the industry's first ever vice president of pricing revenue management. Here we are 24-ish years later, and it's just a great industry to be in. I can't imagine leaving it. So I won't.
Yeah, I know. I feel the same way. I fell into it. I had no idea what the real estate is. It's so funny because you live in apartments. A lot of us have lived in apartments all our lives, and then all of a sudden we figure out that property management is an industry. It's like so behind the scenes. You don't know what's going on. It's so interesting.
Well, it was funny when the CIO, who was my customer, he called me to network. They had decided they needed to have a full-time VP. And when he asked me if I knew anybody, my first reaction was to ask what the pay package was, because I had a couple people in mind, but I wanted to make sure that it would fit them. I didn't even think of myself until he told me what the package would be. And I suddenly went, oh, well, for that, I might be interested.
Yeah.
And it just blurted it out. And he was like, well, we have a non-solicit, so I didn't ask you, but if you're asking us, we'd love to talk to you. So it was literally that accidental. I didn't even think of it when he asked initially. So
yeah, love it. Well, and then you've come so far from that to now, honestly, running one of my favorite platforms in the industry. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm a huge fan of you and your team and your product. I'm a huge fan. I promote it. I sell it, not intentionally, but and you're not paying me to sell it. But I really believe in what you're doing. So something that you and I have talked a lot about, and something that I think a lot about too, and in the software in the company that I'm building right now is the difference between a platform and a point solution. So I really want to start there in our conversation, if that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, that's something about a year ago we coined the term for ourselves that we're a connected analytics platform. We connect different systems of record into a single source of truth. We connect different people that otherwise might not connect in order to collaborate better. And we connect departments that don't necessarily otherwise connect, breaking down silos, all in service of making better decisions faster. And the thing that I've noticed, I mean, look, I've been in the industry now, got 26 years. One of the most common complaints from CIOs, CTOs, COOs is, what I would refer to, or they would refer to as sort of a rat's nest of tech stack. And for a long time, I felt a lot of sympathy for people around that. And then I realized, no, I have empathy because I feel their pain.
Yeah.
But I actually don't have sympathy because, as I've told many CTOs, you're buying exactly, or you're getting exactly what you want to buy. And they look at me and they go, well, no, I don't want that. Like, what are you talking about? I said, well, how are technology decisions made at your company, right? There's some stimulus, there's an itch, somebody needs something or says they need it, and you scratch that itch by buying a point solution. And it makes perfect sense. But then you get another itch and you scratch it with another point solution, and then another, and then another. Natural and logical consequences, you end up with a rat's nest of technology. So I'm a big fan of the famous Gretzky quote about going where the puck ought to be, or I'm sorry, where the puck will be, rather than where it is right now. And I really think that CTOs and CIOs would be well served to think more about where do they want to be 3 to 5 years from now. And I think what you want is a customer-facing platform, right? Your MarTech, your CMS, your CRM, your PMS, et cetera. And then you want an analytics platform, your business intelligence, your budgeting, your pricing, revenue management, other analytics. And if you think about the platform on both of those sides, having things either built and automatically integrated by a single player, which is what we do on the analytics side. I think on the PMS side, the way you've purposely picked various partners, so there's a tight integration. And it's not just a technical integration, it's a business integration. Because there's nothing worse to a CTO than having a problem from their operators or their asset managers, and vendor one says it's vendor two's problem, and vendor two says it's vendor one's problem because of the integration. So, I think that if the industry would start thinking platform and making business purchases based on what they want for their customer-facing platform and what they want for their internal analytics platform, within a few years, you won't hear so many complaints about a rat's nest of tech because it'll be much more intelligently connected.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I actually, before you and I connected and Fortress became such a big partner with REBA, I thought about it in a very similar way, but with a third product that I would introduce, which is accounting. So that you should actually have 3 platforms that you're operating: the customer facing platform, the analytics platform, and an accounting platform. And that, and so before for me, it was customer facing and accounting, and then of course throwing in analytics. And I think, understanding the value of having those 3 systems be separate, but completely holistically integrated is just, it's a more forward-facing way of doing business.
It's massively powerful. I mean, just to speak from our analytics perspective, right? The fact that all of our products are part of the same ecosystem, we only need one set of ETLs. We only need to go through data validation one time. And then, occupancy in your budget is the same as in your PMS and the same as in your revenue management system. If you have 3 different systems, you have 3 different ETLs to manage, 3 different validation cycles to go through. And it's inevitable that one vendor is going to define something one way, another vendor is going to define another way. And now you've got that situation where, 2 or 3 reports have, 3 or 4 different numbers for allegedly the same metric. And so I think, as humans, we naturally think it's sort of funny. We complain a lot about what we got today, but then any idea for the future, we tend to happy path it. And so we just, presume things are going to work out. And I mean, the single hardest part of a REBA implementation is the data validation phase.
Yeah.
Because it is amazing what even the legacy PMSs allow. We just had one 2 weeks ago where we had a massive issue with a new customer where the ETL was failing and they thought we were doing something wrong. And the root cause was they had a dozen leases with negative lengths of stay. So, and I won't name the PMS because I'm not out to embarrass them. It wasn't Fortress. We'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
I won't name who it is, but it's a well-known PMS. And to be honest, I don't know how. It's not really my job to fix that. We just handle the data anomalies then.
Yeah.
But literally, they had 12 leases where the move out was before the move in, and our ETL failed. Okay. It's 2025 and we still have that in our data systems.
Yeah. Oh, I can't even imagine the stories you could tell about the data that you guys are trying to deal with and normalize.
Well, I mean, I'll give you another one real quick. And this one I will mention because it's not embarrassing. It's just a fact. So, Yardi has their box score, and people have been using the Yardi box score for decades.
Yeah.
Well, very early in REBA's start, one of our first customers, they compared our occupancy to the Yardi box score, and they didn't match. So clearly, REBA had to be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
of course.
What we found out was, I think no ill intended to Yardi. I think it's just journalistic. I think most people would agree that the day somebody moves in, they're paying for the unit that's occupied.
Yep.
The day they move out, they're paying for the unit. It's occupied. Okay. It turns out the Yardi box score is hardwired. The move out day is not counted as occupied.
Oh my goodness. That's interesting.
So we were off by just a couple of bips.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And the challenge for us, because we've got to serve many, many customers, what do we do about that? Because I would argue our occupancy is more, air quotes, correct.
Yeah.
And some people may prefer that.
Yeah.
But we definitely have clients who go, well, look, it may be correct, but it's not that big a difference. It doesn't really matter. They're right. That's why I'm not beating up on Yardi. I'm just describing it. Okay. And they're like, you know what? Our clients have had this report for 20 years, 30 years. It's just got to match.
Yep.
Like it's not different enough for me to care. But if they see two different reports with two different numbers, I'm going to hear about it. So, core values of innovation, core values of persistence. You mentioned that. We added a configuration parameter to our ETLs. So each one of our customers can tell us, do they want the move out date counted as occupied or as vacant? Yep. So somebody who wants the right answer, we can do it. Somebody else who wants the Yardi box score answer, which is, it's still right. It's what people have been used to for a long time. They can have that. Yeah. So little things like that, we run into it all the time.
Yeah. I love that story because it really showcases how REBA focuses on like the solution for the customer. Because at the end of the day, like right or wrong is a little irrelevant if like this is just what the customer really needs. And it's like you said, it's their business model. Like it's not just.
Yeah, our mantra is we do not tell people how to run their business. We enable them to make better decisions faster.
Yeah.
If anybody wants our opinion, I mean, I have a consulting background. So does my co-founder and partner, Chris Brust, others in the company. We're happy to give advice, asterisk with pricing. We don't give advice on what your pricing strategy should be. That's a no-no these days. So anybody listening on the pricing side, no, we don't do that. But we're happy to advise on operational things and other stuff when asked.
Yeah.
But just because we would do something one way instead of another way, that's awful. At best, paternalistic and maternalistic. At worst, it's hubristic to try to tell somebody else how to run their business. So we build in the flexibility to let people run the business the way they want to run it.
Yeah, I think that's so smart. I mean, you and I are not known for being shy about sharing our opinions with the caveat that, like, first of all, like we're wrong. We know that we're wrong a lot and it's okay to be wrong. Yep. And and second that like, my right isn't everybody else's right. So I can share my opinion, but you don't have to agree with me. So
this industry has a lot of different businesses with a lot of different strategies and multiple right ways to do things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said.
And a few colossally wrong, but people are welcome to do that if they want to.
We'll let them do it. That's so good. Speaking of that, though, and the businesses, these companies wanting to do things their way, their quote right way, There are a lot of groups these days that have pondered and are still pondering that age-old buy versus build question.
Yeah.
What do you think about this, having been on both sides of it?
Yeah. I mean, Archstone was famous for build.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing there is, like I was one of the champions, and our CIO, Dan Amidro, generally agreed we would buy anywhere we could buy. And so, in the early days, you go back to the late 1990s, early aughts, there was no online lease. We had to build our own because there wasn't one to buy.
Yeah.
So I think, historically, there was more justification to build instead of buy because there just wasn't anything to buy.
Yeah.
Today, the prop tech and particularly the res tech world has so many different solutions and plenty of people who also will co-dev with you. I think, I'll never say never, but I think the number of places where it makes sense to build instead of buy is much, much smaller than it used to be.
Yeah.
And again, I go back to what I said earlier, sort of that happy path bias, right? I've worked with a number of companies back in my consulting days and now today in the REBA world, where you can see them thinking, oh, well, that's just revenue management. We could go do that. That's just a data model. We could go do that. And they're just thinking happy path. They're not thinking about all the alternate paths. They're not thinking about, technical debt. The biggest problem on building in this industry is you're amortizing your cost over your portfolio. 20,000 units, 40,000 units, maybe 50 to 100,000 units, other than a gray star, right? Mm-hmm. And I found this even at Archstone, where I learned my lesson the hard way. Anytime I got value engineered on V1, don't worry, we'll get to it in V2. Well, guess what? A year later or 2 years later, that V2 was an enhancement competing with resources for other ideas that were going to be a V1. Yeah. So the V2 was a little lift, the V1 for something else would be a big lift, and our V2 just kept getting under the line. Or, oh, that's nice, but we only have 60,000 units, we don't really need it. Whereas a vendor is expecting to have 1 million, 2 million, 3 million units. So they will invest more, and they can't not have a V2, V3, V4. So again, you think you're going to get to it. Nah, reality doesn't always work out that way. Yeah. And then lastly, the toughest problem in tech is recruiting great engineers. Yep. And, I go back, I saw this in my Archstone days. We only picked up 2 kinds of engineers on our team that were any good. They were either very young and early in their career, and they were great, but we'd only hold on to them for a year or 2. Yeah. Because they would leave to go to a tech company. Because at Archstone, we were an operating company, right? So the career path for an engineer is pretty limited. Yep. They could go to a vendor where, a chief product officer or a chief, scientist is a possibility. So we'd either get somebody very young, and we'd lose them in a year or 2, or the best ones we got were people on the backside of their career that were good and experienced. They'd been through the grind, and what they really wanted was just a 40-hour work week, and not to have to work vendor hours. But of course, then you also don't get the same energy that you get. So, the bottom line is tech companies give an objectively better career path for engineers. So if you're building as a management or an operating company, how are you going to compete with tech companies to recruit good engineers? Yeah. So I think all that combined biases me more towards buy versus build, with the exception if there's a compelling need and there is no product or nobody you can partner with. Well, then of course, don't let that get in your way.
Yeah, I get approached all the time, especially at conferences, with property management companies that because I was running the president of Elmington Property Management when we decided to build Fortress, right? So we chose build. And we had spent a lot of money doing buy with the core systems, and we're really frustrated. So we went down the build path ourselves. And so I have a lot of groups that come up to me and want to talk about that experience. And honestly, the first thing out of my mouth is always, well, it's going to be like 10 times as hard, take 4 times as long, and at least cost double what you think it's going to. So if you're prepared for that risk, by all means, you should do it.
and really, I would argue, at least the way it evolved with Fortress and Elmington, it was more a co-dev, right? Because Elmington isn't just building their own for just Elmington
Yeah.
because of all the things I just talked about.
Yeah.
So more, really they spun off
Yeah.
a tech company that they have an ownership in.
Yeah.
And that is a version of build. I mean, by the way, one of our investors is Brookfield. They were our launch customer and basically co-dev.
Yeah.
My partner had been talking to them about building yet another bespoke BI platform, which is what he was doing for a living. And then we went to them and kind of moved their cheese and said, well, I got it. I got some good news for you. You don't have to spend $3 million to build V1.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to invest something less than that. And then they're, of course, like, oh, well, we won't have total control. Well, we'll have a lot of control on V1. And then, no, you won't, but you'll also get the benefit of other people's ideas. And, we were blessed that Brookfield agreed that made sense, and they helped launch us.
Yeah. I mean, that sort of partnership is just so crucial to creating a really phenomenal product that is going to serve the industry. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you actually, I'll share one other funny story. So you mentioned the difficulty in talent. Fortress is in a growth phase right now. And so we actually have just hired 16 new team members on the engineering side. And that's been going on for the past 3 months. But as we've been doing that, we started with a pool of candidates that was massive. I mean, massive pool of candidates, and have had to whittle that down in the funnel. And as they, came in through the funnel, we would run them through an engineering test that we've created that includes some pretty cool concepts about leveraging AI to build code faster, those sorts of things. Just wanting to make sure that our candidates, are pretty high level. Mm-hmm. And the number of candidates that failed that test is 70%. So, I mean, how difficult it is to hire these days. And you have to really understand engineering to make sure that you get a good engineer.
And one of the reasons we're a virtual company, when we built our original pro forma, I thought we'd have an office in our third year.
Yeah.
And then, back then the Metas and Googles of the world were flying high.
Yeah.
It was brutal to hire engineers in 2020, 2021. And we just learned quickly that the fastest way to have a decent candidate pool was to tell people they didn't have to move.
Yeah. Yep. Same.
And then I looked at the P&L and I went, oh, I'm not paying to move people. And my rent line is $200 a month for the self-storage unit that's holding our swag.
Yeah.
and I started to like it a little more.
Yeah.
And I swear today you can recruit a little easier because the big tech companies are not flying so high. But, I would say 90% of the people we've hired would not have joined us if we had made them move to Denver.
Agreed. Same on my side. Yeah. Yeah. It's just it's a very interesting market right now. And I don't know, this is such an aside. I don't know if you've had experienced this. We actually, through this process, ended up hiring one candidate, and another one we found out early enough in the process that it was this situation. But where there are South Korean and North Korean companies that are paying U.S. engineers to apply to jobs and then take those jobs and take the American salary, but then send some of it back to North Korea, South Korea, Vietnam. There's multiple countries that are doing this, where engineers in that country who are working so the money goes to that company who then pay engineers locally to actually do the work. And so yes. And so apparently there's actually been a few Reddit articles out there about it. But anyway, it's a pretty normal. So we of course have a lot of monitoring on the computer. So there was something that was a little suspicious about this person when he first started, and he immediately installed a VPN client that would not necessarily otherwise have been necessary. And so of course anyway, went down that path and ended up letting him go. But apparently it's a big problem in the industry. So.
Well, we haven't run into that, or if it's happening, it's beneath our nose right now. But I will tell you, as we've grown, we've hired a lot of people in the last 6 months as well. One of the things our CTO is working on is how do we measure productivity, right? The customer success team, you can tell whether customers are being served or not. On the engineering side, there are definitely ways to do it, but in our early days, we just knew everybody, and it was just kind of obvious what was being done and what wasn't being done.
Yeah.
Definitely to run a virtual company. We don't want to be Big Brother. I don't know that I want to be tracking keystrokes per se.
Yeah.
But we definitely, through ticket counts, DevOps counts, et cetera, you definitely need some way, we're a data company, we need data to measure how people are performing
Yeah.
so that you can at least find those anomalies and do something about it. But,
Yeah.
people quiet quit in an office as well. So
Yeah.
it's not unique to the virtual companies.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we do things exactly what you're talking about, like GitHub commits, like, utilizing all the data to
Yeah.
just understand what's
Yeah.
happening. Yeah. So we talked about buy versus build, and I think that is a very interesting conversation that's happening right now with a lot of companies because of specifically pointed towards revenue management, which is obviously something that you also are solving for. And
Mhm.
because of what's happening in the world, in legislature, in the courts,
Yeah.
and so you being the expert in this, and I know that there's a lot
Mhm.
of confusion and probably a lot of misunderstanding about what's actually happening right now.
Yeah.
What is the argument right now? Like, what is the train of thought around what revenue management solutions are doing that isn't, quote, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean to sound cavalier about it, but it's really simple.
Yeah.
Don't use non-public competitor data,
Yeah.
and you're going to be in safe harbor for Sherman antitrust.
Mm-hmm.
There's some legislatures that are looking at declaring some things to be deceptive business practices, et cetera. But like my biggest fear is people overreacting to what's happening
Mm-hmm.
and not paying attention to the detail. So I even had one the other day where somebody called me about a city ordinance and they thought it was banning algorithmic pricing because the title of the bill was, banning algorithmic pricing in rental housing. And I've learned over the last couple of years now that the titles of bills, whether it's city, state, or even federal, they're the legislative equivalent of clickbait. They're written intentionally provocatively
Yeah.
to get people's eyeballs. If
So
you
funny.
then read, like you and I, because we speak English, would say banning algorithmic pricing means, it's not just the systems under lawsuit right now. A system like REBA Rent is a pricing algorithm.
Yeah.
They must be banning that.
Yeah.
By the way, there is some, if you're just using your own first party data, there's some serious corporate free speech, so First Amendment
Agreed.
consequences
Mm-hmm.
around the notion of banning all algorithmic pricing.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll put the Constitution aside for a moment, and we'll just say that's what the headline says. That must be what it means.
Yeah.
Well, if you take the time, and I recognize executives are busy, they don't have a lot of time, but if somebody would take the time to read the actual proposed ordinance, invariably it defines an algorithm or an algorithmic device as one that is trained on or uses non-public competitor data.
Mm-hmm.
So the English word algorithmic pricing, from a legal perspective, gets narrowed down a lot,
Yeah.
very materially in its definition, in which case a product like REBA Rent, clean as a driven snow.
Yeah.
So if the bill that passed in Philadelphia, it is law in Philadelphia, it is law in San Francisco, it is law in Berkeley, it's about to become law in San Diego, and then there are multiple states looking at different things. Every single one that I've read that has passed or is close to passing limits the definition of algorithmic pricing to the use of non-public data in that. Now, some of them are going a bit further and either proposing or enacting even an operator cannot mix data from two different landlords or two different owners. So a fee manager would have to keep the data for client one separate from the data for client two. Again, not a problem, completely configurable in REBA Rent. It's an annoyance, but it's not existential.
Mm-hmm.
So the notion that you have to build your own or you're going to be at risk, not true. The Cortland proposed settlement with DOJ and the settlement with the states of Colorado and North Carolina that just got finalized.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Portland had already built their own. So they didn't mind negotiating that, what would have to happen if they were ever going to use a third party.
Yeah.
They were going to use their own. They'd already built it. Candidly, I wish they'd cared a little more about the industry, but so be it. The reality is, though, if you read that settlement, it has a very specific process by which you can get approved to have a third-party system. So again, the headlines are provocative because it's clickbait. The reality is much, much more nuanced and leaves plenty of room for good solutions like REBA Rent.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I agree with
And I think that it's interesting, this identifying between the two different arguments that are happening right here. Like, right, one is it collusive to share non-public information and to utilize non-public information? But then there's the second of which you and I have discussed, which is the unfair and deceptive business practice. So are there any, and so far we've discussed the legislation that is limiting the algorithm to only data that is, or to eliminating the use of data that is non-public. What about data that is public, but that isn't your own? Because you mentioned there's some instances in which legislation is even saying you can't collude owner A with owner B.
Well, collude, yeah. So I mean, so again, I'm not a lawyer, but I spent a lot of time talking to lawyers and working on this. So let me separate a couple things. The issue of whether the use of non-public competitor data, and I'm always careful saying non-public competitor data, right? I mean, if I'm an operator, my own data is non-public, but if it's first party, it's my own. Again, that should be okay.
Yep.
So non-public competitor data. I'm actually on record as saying I don't think it's collusive. I wrote a white paper, co-wrote a white paper with Tom Beveridge and Jeffrey Roper, who was the main force behind YieldStar, basically outlining how in an industry that is as fragmented as we are, with as many different business strategies out there, it's actually impossible to collude. In order to collude, everybody has to agree on the objective, right? And a fee manager has a different objective than an owner-operator. A publicly traded REIT has a different objective than a value add flipper, et cetera. So for a whole lot of reasons, if anybody wants to read more, check out the white paper, email me, whatever, I can send it to you. So I don't actually think it's collusive, but I will say I'm not skilled enough to define that. In fact, most of the attorneys I've talked to are not 100% sure. It would have to go to trial and be decided.
Yeah, I agree with that.
What REBA is on record as saying is we don't think it's fair, right? It's not fair for two companies to share information that you, the consumer, do not have access to in order to in order to affect what your price will be. So we just think as a matter of fairness, landlords shouldn't do that. And if a legislature wants to declare that to be a deceptive business practice, that's their right. We don't have any problem with it because we don't use that data anyway. Okay. Now, your question about the use of public data, right? My understanding of the Sherman Antitrust Act is absolutely you can use it. It's the old saw of you and I have gas stations across the street from each other.
Yeah.
I can see you raise the price 2 cents and I can go raise it 2 cents. I can't call you ahead to find out what you're going to do. That's collusive. But parallel pricing by observation, no problem. And I can screen scrape. That's just a faster way to observe.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm pretty confident Sherman Antitrust, you're fine.
Yeah.
What I will say though is it's uncertain whether the states have a right to even ban that practice, because they don't ban it for gas stations. So why should they ban it for apartments? I think that would end up having to get passed and then go to court to figure that one out. I'll say from a REBA rent perspective, we don't actually care because we don't even use the publicly available data in our algorithm. We don't just believe, we know the industry over indexes on comp data for pricing purposes.
Couldn't agree more.
To rely on comp data for pricing purposes is to cede your pricing decision to a competitor who at best may just have a different strategy. At worst, may have a completely different situation that shouldn't affect your pricing at all.
Yeah.
When I was using LRO at Archstone, we couldn't get good data in commercial business districts of major cities, because I'll use Manhattan as an example. Yesterday, the price for one bedrooms was starting at $4,100. Today, it's starting at $4,500. Did the price go up $400? So I need to react. Oh, upon further review, if you look really closely, yesterday that $4,100 unit was a second floor unit. It must have rented. And today the starting at price is a 21st floor unit with granite countertops and a wonderful view of the Hudson River. That's the $400. Okay. So we just couldn't parse through that and understand how much of that difference was base rent versus amenity. So we ran LRO for a decade in New York without using any comp data at all.
Yeah.
We built REBA Rent to not need any comp data at all. The demand and supply data around leases and notices and leads and everything else is more than sufficient. And we have done head-to-heads against legacy systems with customers of ours and beaten legacy systems by anywhere from 1 to 2 points.
Yeah.
So the things that we've learned in the last 20 years to allow the algorithms to be quicker to respond to changes and more precise in their answer are plenty good. You don't really need comp data in the algorithm. We like to use the word comp data is potentially an interesting guardrail. It's not a guide rail. So if you want to use the comp data, and you can in REBA Rent, to alert, hey, we're 8 or 9% away from the comps, maybe a human should look. We're not going to change the rent algorithmically, but a human might go in and decide I'm okay with that or I'm not okay with that or whatever. So it's a guardrail, it's an alert, but it's not a guide rail. It shouldn't be driving the pricing.
I couldn't agree with you more on this. I really am a purist when it comes to supply and demand for the intrinsic asset. In this case, I really am. I mean, supply and demand is so variable and it's so dependent upon the exact asset. It really is. So
yeah, and again, I'm not just opining that from a theory basis. I have 10 years of doing it in New York, doing it in San Francisco, doing it in downtown LA. And we now have a couple years with REBA Rent of doing it, including head-to-heads. So, there's data to prove you don't actually need that.
Yeah. I love hearing that. It really validates what I've been saying for the past, I guess, 8 years since I've had an opinion on this, although mine's just been gut. So I appreciate your experience.
Your gut was right.
Oh, I appreciate that. So you've talked a little bit about like REBA's model, but when you decided to actually build REBA, the way that you went about building it, and especially in partnership, I think is really unique. And the focus on the customer. I'd love for you to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's funny because I mentioned my partner Chris Brust, right? I mean, he was when I was at Talis, he was the project manager at Archstone, and when I switched sides, he was my number 2. We're very much co-equals now. Definitely want to give him props there. But I would argue that he and I are probably the most experienced pricing and revenue management people in industry. Our product manager came from Irvine Apartments, which had a very sophisticated, I did some consulting with them. That's how I met him.
Yeah.
They have a very sophisticated approach to it. We really had the dream team, and we had our design, and we could have gone and built it. But one of our other core values is humility, right? We don't lack opinions, but we know we can learn from every single person we meet.
Yeah.
And so we actually put together a product advisory committee of 10 of the top revenue management users in the industry as we saw them. And we went through a very formal exercise where we asked them, what about their current system and their current processes did they love and they would never want to lose, right? Because we didn't want to build something that was great here, but it sucked over there because it took something away. And then, of course, we asked them, well, what bothers you? What's a pain?
Love this.
What are the things you wish it would do better, right? And interestingly, I mean, not surprisingly, the vast majority of our design held up. I'd say about 85%. I mean, I've been really disappointed if Chris, Brad, and me with our background only got it half right.
Yeah.
Like, I don't mean to sound arrogant, but
no.
you do this do it for 25 years, we ought to get it pretty darn right. But that's not the headline. The headline is it was only 85%. There's about 15% of the design from our original thoughts that we changed 1 or 2 things quite fundamentally.
Yeah.
Because the group and all of their varied experiences shared stuff with us that we either hadn't thought of or we thought might not be right, but there was a consensus in the group. Or maybe, we have to, back to my Yardi box score example, the rent example of that. Okay, some people want to do it this way, some people want to do it that way. We're not going to tell people how to run their business. We'll configure it so each user can choose.
Yeah.
So 15% of the design ended up different from that exercise. And, it might be the best 15% because that's the edge. That's the bit that makes the system so much better than the legacy systems because we didn't lack opinions. We didn't lack ego, but we did have the humility to proactively reach out to other experts and listen to them and then incorporate what, was obviously better ideas from them than we had ourselves.
Yeah. At Fortress, we constantly remind ourselves to, even if what the customer is asking for seems incorrect or ignorant or whatever word you want to put it, even if it seems that way, we really need to pay attention to those feelings, because at the end of the day, like, the feeling that a customer has with our product is their experience. That is the experience that they have with us.
Well, and my favorite question is why.
Yeah.
Right?
And ask it
I
5
don't mean
times.
why. You gotta be careful, because why can sound challenging.
Yeah.
So I rarely say, why do you think that? That sounds like I think you're an idiot.
Yeah.
But the equivalent of why. So help me understand the importance of that. Could you explain the reasoning behind that? Oh, that's a little different than what, I was consulting with a company I thought was similar to yours, and they were, without giving away anything NDA, they kind of had a different strategy. Help me understand this difference. And if you dig into that layer of the why underneath it, then you typically find one of three things. They are wrong, but now you can help them actually educate them on why that's wrong and what a better answer would be in a way that is very supportive and organic. You find out they're absolutely right. Oh crap, I didn't think about that. Good thing I'm listening. And then the middle ground is they're right, but they just didn't realize, oh no, with our tool, there's actually a way to do it.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. Like, I don't have to change the code. We didn't train you well enough, or we haven't explained enough. There's actually a way to do exactly what you're talking about. All three of those answers are equally good.
Yep.
But if you just knee jerk, we know better than they are, dumb operator, whatever, dumb asset manager, you miss out on 2 out of the 3.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's so well said. So speaking of the logic of threes, you have, which I think is just such a great number. And psychologically, we like it.
Be careful. You're about to get me to go into the Monty Python routine about 3 shall be the number. The number shall be 3. We'll stop right there.
Oh, you sure?
Tom Beveridge does a really good version of it because he's got the English accent.
Okay. You sure you don't want to share? You're more than welcome to.
No,
Okay.
We'll keep going.
All right. Well,
Monty Python fans know what I'm talking about.
I don't, but I was gonna lean in. It's okay. Tell me about your 3-cell model.
Yeah, and as you say, it's mine. I got to give props. My brother, who is an expert in sales enablement and sales strategy, I think invented it. If he didn't invent it, then he stole it and pretended it was his well enough that I'm giving him credit for it. But it's, there's so many models out there, the MEDDIC model, the Challenger model, this model, that model, et cetera, et cetera. What I love about the 3-cell model is really, really simple and easy to understand and remember. So anytime somebody's buying something, there's actually not one sale, there's 3 sales happening. Okay. The first sale, sale 1, is getting the prospect to state, I have a problem and there's a compelling enough reason to solve it. I'm going to do something about it. Because you and I have run into people who, I call it the psychologist dilemma. I see the problem you have. I could help you if only you would admit you had the problem.
Yeah.
Right. But you don't think you have anxiety disorder. You don't think you're a bit OCD. So I can't help you. Right. If you don't agree that you have a problem, there's no sale to be made.
Yeah.
Especially in this industry, you can run into, Kerri, you're absolutely right. That is a problem and it's annoying. And you know what? I got 5 other problems that are more important. So I'm not going to do anything about it right now. In fact, the age old, I can only put so much on my operators, right? Which I'm amused because back in COVID, we found out we could put a lot more on the operators than we thought. And I remember people blogging or opining, ooh, the pace of tech adoption has changed forever. And I went, no. It's existential risk right now, so people will move. Watch, within a year or 2 after COVID, people will be right back to, ooh, I don't want to overload my field people. So existential risk has a way of motivating people. The normal course of things, you're a little more protective of them. I'm not saying you shouldn't be. I'm probably sounding like that's wrong. I'm just saying that that's exactly how humans behave.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Okay. So sale 1, I have a problem and I'm going to do something about it. If we can't get past that, no deal to be done. Sale 2, this is what a good solution looks like. And if you and I can agree on what a good solution looks like, then I'm well positioned for sale 3. Well, here's my solution and why you should buy it. Oh, by the way, if I'm repping a good product, surprise, surprise, that looks a lot like what a good solution would look like.
Yeah.
And so a couple of things, salespeople and even marketers online, they tend to jump to sale 3 way too fast, right? Here's why you should buy from me.
Yep.
Sale 3 is all about me. Sale 1 and 2 is all about you.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about me, you might be listening, but you got your sales shield up,
Yep.
right? When we're talking about you, I'm learning, you're trusting my reaction because I'm in more of a consultative mode.
Yep.
And the way I become
Yep.
a true trusted advisor, right? The word trusted advisor is thrown around like a buzzword in the sales world.
Yeah.
But the way you become a trusted advisor is by actually giving advice they can trust. And you do that by listening to what their problems are, why it's a priority to solve, or help them realize why it should be a priority to solve.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bigger deal than you think. Let me explain. So sale 1 and sale 2, I'm much more likely to be listened to and trusted. And the reality is I can't do sale 3 if I haven't gotten sale 1 and sale 2 done as well. So
Yeah.
I like that model, right? Number 1, have a problem and I'm willing to do something about it. Not willing, I'm going to do something about it. Number 2, this is what a good solution looks like. And only after all that, number 3, okay, this is the solution I'm going to buy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's such solid advice for those that are in the industry and trying to make that sale. And I agree with you. When we think about marketing, a lot of the time we try to think about surfacing the potential problem rather than our solution. Just instead, like surfacing the problem and helping others like see that they have a problem and put a name to that problem, and then understanding that there are solutions out there, generally speaking, not just ours. So I agree. I think that's such a smart way to model your business. And in terms of, a company and how REBA has come to be so successful and how you've been so successful in your life, I know that one of your core values that is so important to you is persistence. So how important is persistence to you, and to how important do you think it is to success?
Yeah, to success, I think it's everything. Maybe some people are blessed with enough talent that it just all comes to them easily.
Yeah.
I think the world is so complex today, even talented people, struggle on that. I always love, the overnight success. I remember when I do some stuff in the music business on the side. I remember when the Avett Brothers in the late 90s hit, maybe it was the early aughts, and people, I heard somebody go, well, the Avett Brothers, what an overnight success. Okay, I got a friend of mine in North Carolina who saw the Avett Brothers. He knew them personally. He saw them when they couldn't get 20 people to show up to a coffee house. Okay. Yep. That was an overnight success, 10 or 12 years in the making.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That was persistence. So I don't think there's too many people who are successful without persistence. It's the resilience to just keep fighting through and insisting there must be a way. One of the examples I love to give of persistence at REBA, on our business intelligence platform, we were working with a set of APIs from a PMS, again, not Fortress, so you don't have to worry that this is a problem on your side. But our lead counts were not matching the reports. They were always substantially higher. And we figured out that, well, they did this deduping of guest cards, but the problem was in the lead API, all it said was that a guest card had been deduped. It didn't tell you the key for the guest card it was deduped with. So you didn't know which one to take out, or okay, we could dedupe it for total count, but we're not going to get count by week or by day or anything else that's really useful to the marketer. And PMS acknowledged the issue and they weren't going to do anything about it. And we're like, well, crap, are we going to lose our ability to do BI? And this was a 30,000 unit launch customer.
Yeah.
We're going to lose this deal over one important metric. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? We kept poking. We finally figured out they also had a lead report API. And if you took the lead report API and you sorted it in a particular order intelligently, you could then actually match up and infer which the groupings of deduped leads were, then take the key from each of those rows, go back to the lead API and get it right. Now, is that more complex? Does the API take a little longer, or the ETL take a little longer to run? Yeah, but the persistence to just go, it's just data. There's got to be a way. There's got to be a way. There's got to be a way. We solved it, and now we have many customers using that PMS, and we're able to deliver accurate lead counts.
Yeah, I love both of those concepts. Jeff Bezos is actually attributed with the quote that all overnight success takes about 10 years. And
Yeah,
so I couldn't agree
yeah.
more. I share that with my team all the time. Fortresses, um, some definitions successful and others not. But at the same time, like we've only been around for 7 years. So,
Yeah.
give it a
Well,
chance.
yeah, I mean, I usually rip off sayings from others. This one I think I actually created myself, but the team will tell you they've heard this many, many times from me. Anytime we're struggling a bit, I'm like, guys, if this was easy, somebody else would have already done it.
Yep, yep, yep.
Like, we don't add value by doing things people have already done.
Yeah,
We add value
yeah.
by doing something nobody's done before.
Yes.
And those by definition are not easy.
Yes, yes, I love it. I love that saying. And in terms of persistence, I couldn't agree with you more that like persistence is the key to success. I actually just watched my son plays a highly competitive travel soccer, and we
Mhm,
were on a trip together, the two of us, to Knoxville for some of his
mhm,
competitive soccer, and we spent the night there. And we watched a movie together called Hustle. And it's so
mhm.
good, such a good movie, and it's really about persistence. And so I highly recommend it, especially for anyone who has teenagers who might be interested
Oh,
in it.
cool.
Um,
Very cool.
yeah. So, Donald, we have had such a great conversation, but I'd love to ask you, especially because of your unique time in the industry, if you would mind to share with our audience a story about your time in multifamily.
Oh, a story. There's so many stories. I mean, one thing that comes to mind all of a sudden is a couple 3 years in, I realized something. I was running pricing revenue management, right? We were the pointy headed geeks, kind of a bit intimidated in the field, really trying hard not to be the department of no, etc. And I always was looking for like ways to connect on a more personal level.
Hmm.
So I'm a huge fan of going out in the field and shadowing, watching, following, like observing. So I would make sure to get out in the field. And one of the things I realized early on is like I'd be out with a community manager or a regional, and I'd always make sure to take them to lunch.
Mm.
Okay. Um, I come from a Northeast Jewish family. Breaking bread is how you connect with people,
Yeah.
right? It's a human thing. Okay. So, okay, let's go break bread. And then I realized um, one of the simplest ways to really connect um, was I always made sure I picked up the check. And it's really funny. You think about it, it's like, well, who cares? The company's paying for it either way. But operators, I realized operators are incredibly budget conscious,
Yeah.
right? If they end up busting their budget by even $100, their VP is going to scream at them. My boss never, I lived 10 years as a VP up to an SVP at Archstone and never got out. I mean, I had to do my budget, I had to look at it, but nobody ever came and, how come you spent $100 more on meals last month than you originally
Yeah.
budgeted?
Yeah.
Never got asked that question. So the fact that I would put our meal on my budget instead of theirs, it was amazing the goodwill that got. Blew my mind. The other one is, again, show, don't just say you're empathetic, show empathy. Um, one of my best pieces of advice, I've given this to dozens and dozens of people. When you're touring a property and you're walking with a community manager, keep looking at the ground. If you see a cigarette butt or a candy
Pick it
wrapper,
up.
bend over and pick it up.
Yep.
It is amazing how you connect with the community manager
Hmm.
when you do that,
Hmm.
because you're watching out for the asset just like they are.
Yeah.
And so again, just finding those, my favorite stories are when I just connected with somebody. I mean, I get lots of successes around math, lots of successes around technology, whatever. That was the human connections that I made. It was the, empowering or enabling somebody to feel a little better about what they were doing.
Yeah.
Those are the stories that pop to mind right away.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like that resonates so well with what you're doing today. I mean, you are making everyone's lives easier with providing them with either BI or pricing or helping them with their budgeting. You're still creating that human connection because the data, yes, it's data and it's pricing, but it's really helping the teams, whether
Yeah.
it's asset managers or on-site teams, to do their job,
Mm,
a difficult
I'm
job.
preternaturally lazy, so I hate taking 10 minutes to do something that could be done in 5. So we want to help people figure out how to do it in 5 minutes, not 10.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm naturally lazy, but I am extremely I become extremely frustrated with inefficiencies. So I'm also extremely motivated to find a
Yeah,
shorter way to do things. um
absolutely.
So, and then my last question, which I am excited to hear this answer from you specifically, is there a book that you would recommend to our listeners?
Oh God, there's so many books that have meant something in my life. The first, well, the one book, if you read no other book that I think could guide life better than anything else, would be Stephen Covey's Seven Habits of Highly Successful People.
Yeah.
There are plenty of other ones I can rattle off that are nearly as good or had nearly as much impact. But if I could only recommend one book to read to be a North Star for not just career but for life,
Hmm.
I think it would be that book.
Okay. Well, now I have to ask you what your second and third are.
I mean, a few of them. Jim Collins' Good to Great
Yeah. One of my
was
favorite
really
books of all
good.
time.
Um, uh, Hiram Smith, who created the Franklin Planner, the 10 Natural Laws of Time and Life Management.
Oh, I haven't even heard of that
Oh,
one.
it's a wonderful. His whole model around the belief window is spectacular. Also, the whole. I was never a Franklin Planner person because I'm just too ADD to spend that much time writing it all down. But what's cool in that book is he talks about all the biggest problem with American or Western approaches to time management is we try to manage our day. His advice is don't manage your day, manage your week.
Hmm.
The day
Yep.
is too short. You'll build your
Yeah, I've
list and
read
then you
that.
won't get
Yeah.
stuff done and you'll beat yourself up. Make a list of things you want to accomplish in the week. If you don't get it done on Monday or Tuesday, you still have Thursday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And there's a whole bunch of other tips in there. But Hiram Smith's 10 Laws of Time and Life Management, really good. And then Michael Gerber's The E Myth, E being entrepreneurial, not E like technology. Really understanding, as soon as you start, most alleged entrepreneurs are not really entrepreneurs. They start a business, um, and the worst thing happens to them, they succeed because they started a business because they were great at doing the thing. But when you succeed, you very quickly find out you're not in the business of selling travel or the business of coding software or the business of consulting. You're in the business of being in the business of selling travel or being in the business of coding software, being in the
Oh.
business of consulting. And very few people are truly entrepreneurial. Most people are just really good at what they do as a functional performer. And if you want to found and run a successful business, you have to learn how to be in the business of being in that business. So that was
Yeah.
another book that kind of changed my perspective.
Oh, I love that. Well, thank you for sharing all those. I know
Sure.
you're an avid reader as well. So I appreciate it. When that was the Seven Habits of Highly Successful People, when that was your number one, I was like, oh, we've got to hear the others now because that's one of my favorite books of all time. Well,
Yeah.
Donald, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate it. It was
Well, thank you.
a phenomenal conversation and full of insight and wisdom that I know our listeners will appreciate.
Oh, you're too kind, but appreciated the time. Thanks.